Good evening. My name is Fred Davey, and I am the chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board here in New York City. I want to start by thanking you all for joining us tonight and by thanking our partners in government for participating in this discussion. We are convening this panel tonight to inform the city's policing reform plan that will be sent to Governor Cuomo because independent civilian oversight is a key to reform and is an integral part of public safety. I'm excited for each panelist to share their recommendations, lessons learned, best practices with the public and the oversight agencies across the state and the country who are in attendance here tonight. New York City can truly be a leader in police transparency and accountability. Thank you all again for joining us tonight, and we want to thank our moderator, Dean Meminger, for being with us as well. And with that, I turn it over to Spectrum News, New York 1's Dean Meminger. Dean.
Thank you very much for that. And this is a very important conversation, everyone, that we are having this evening with the year that we had, 2020, when it came to not only here in New York City, but across the state and the country with the protests, clashes with the police, sometimes even chaos when we saw some of those protests. The governor asking for reforms to come from municipalities and from police departments, but it is also very important to find out how the oversight agencies, like all of the people gathered here tonight, what is their role? Are they going to be reformed? And how do we not only push police departments to reform and become better when it comes to protecting and serving, but the oversight agencies as well? I think when you talk about everyone being the best they can, that works out well for community and cops, something that I often report on New York 1 as the criminal justice reporter and an anchor. I am often in the middle of some of these very big stories. And one reason why I said, yes, I would host this panel, or at least be the moderator, was because for 25 years, I've been covering news in my hometown of New York City. And I have covered cases of people killed tragically by NYPD officers. Sometimes it appears the acts were egregious. Other times, clearly there were mistakes. But at the end of the day, a family member has lost a loved one. So if we can talk about reforming the police department, whether it's training or getting rid of the quote unquote bad apples, that's one thing. But the oversight agencies are so important with trying to help community members and monitoring what police officers and police departments such as the NYPD do. So we have a great panel, a great discussion. Of course, you just heard members of the media, press, and the public will chime in as well, and they will have some great questions for us. But I want to bring in some of the panelists. I will introduce them all, but then allow for them to talk about who they are and what they bring to the table. So, of course, we heard from Fred Davey starting off, but we also have Jonathan Deutsch, the Executive Director of the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Hey there, John, I see you. Marnie Blint, Executive Director of the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption. Marnie, thank you. And I understand if we go long, you may have to move out because you have a class. So we do understand that, but that's in a little while from now. And we have Philip Ure, the Inspector General for the NYPD. Phil, thank you for joining us. John, let's start out with who you are and what you bring to the table during this critical time in New York City and New York State history.
Thank you, Dean. 26 years ago, the CCRB achieved independence from the NYPD as part of the struggle of Black and brown communities to be treated fairly in the city. We are here today because Executive Order 203 specifically addresses continued racial disparities in policing. The CCRB's jurisdiction includes excessive force, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and offensive language by members of the NYPD. I want to thank my colleagues for joining in this panel. I think it's important that we have this conversation so that we can look at where we can do better as the main entities for civilian oversight in this city and how we can serve as a guide for communities elsewhere in this state and in the country.
remember to mute and unmute when I'm supposed to. Thank you for that, John. Marnie from the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization you represent.
Hi, thank you, Dean, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I am the Executive Director of the New York City Commission to Combat Police Corruption. We're probably the smallest, one of the smallest commissions in the city, one of the smallest city agencies. We were formed in 1995 through an executive order that gave us the power to conduct studies and analysis of the police department's efforts and policies and practices enacted to prevent corruption temptation, corruption hazards, and tolerance of corruption and corruption attitudes. And we do that principally by looking at how IAB, the Internal Affairs Bureau, investigates allegations of corruption and serious misconduct, and by looking at the disciplinary system. I think one of the things that we have brought to the table is we brought transparency somewhat into, without naming names, into the disciplinary penalties available to officers on a yearly, semi-yearly basis, so that people can have an understanding of how officers are punished.
That and Philip, you're up next, Inspector General for the NYPD, one of the newer positions in New York City when it comes to monitoring the NYPD.
Thank you, Dean, and good evening to everyone. And I know there are people from outside New York City joining us tonight. It's a very snowy evening here. Yes, the OIG NYPD started up in 2014. I was the first Inspector General. City Council passed a law creating this office, which I'll just paraphrase from memory, which gave us the authority to audit, study, review, recommend policies, procedures, operations of the NYPD, bearing on civil rights, civil liberties issues affecting the confidence in the police, and so forth. And so the vision of the office was to create an office that wrote reports, made findings and made recommendations. It was not intended to overlap the jurisdiction of the CCRB, which was investigating individual police misconduct cases, but was meant to complement the CCRB. In addition to doing our systemic work, we have an investigative unit that handles complaint intake, and we do investigate some individual cases, although, again, in trying not to duplicate the work of CCRB and IAB, we will typically refer matters within CCRB's jurisdiction to them and refer cases as appropriate back to IAB and NYPD. So that's, we're relatively new, 6 years old, but time flies.
All right, so everyone watching and chiming in a little later on, we will ask a bunch of questions, and to the panelists, if you each want to answer the question, that is fine, or if I find it necessary, maybe I'll ask each one of you a variety of questions. But I really want to start off with, when we talk about the governor of the state, Cuomo, asking for reform from police departments across the state. Here in the city, we're talking about the NYPD. It's a major organization, right? Just last year, the year before, we had 36,000 police officers. Now they say it's down to 34,000, but we know they're about to hire another 900 or 1,000. Very big. With the civilians, you're talking about 55,000 employees of the NYPD. All of you have these organizations where you're supposed to oversee what the NYPD does. When it comes to reform, how would you like to see your organization be reformed so it is better in its oversight, its duties of monitoring the NYPD and keeping that police department accountable to the citizens of New York City? John, I guess we can start with you, the CCRB.
Thanks, Dean. I think the most important change that could happen for the CCRB is for us to have direct access to body-worn cameras. The department has done great work in eliminating the backlog of body-worn camera requests. but work we've done this year on protest cases has shown us that oftentimes body-worn camera requests sometimes come back with negative results. But then when our investigators are working together, there may be a case that came back, a request that brought back results that are not only useful for the case they were requested for, but for other cases. And so having the ability to search the database on our own to see what videos were there would be a big help for the CCRB.
Maybe we can have everyone answer that question in terms of, how would you like to see your agency change to better monitor the NYPD? Because as I mentioned, it's such a big organization, the NYPD, and whenever any of your organizations, you put out a report or you're critical, the NYPD comes at you like Goliath and, tries to squash you. In some cases, sometimes they agree, but we know it's often combative. So, Marnie, how would you, and then also you, Phil, how would you like to see that reform of your agency work?
I'll go first. I sometimes wish the police department would come at us like Goliath. For us, I have two ways. One is with the NYPD, oftentimes we issue reports, we make recommendations, and they don't give us any feedback on our recommendations. So they don't tell us if they're adopting them, if they're not adopting them, why they're not adopting them, do they agree in principle, but it's not going to work, and why it's not going to work. And if we had more of a dialogue with them, I think that would be helpful. And just recently, we had a lot of input, a lot of comments on their draft disciplinary matrix, and we made lengthy comments, and we did, after meeting with the Deputy Commissioner of Risk Management, a video conference was set up to meet with the people in charge of that project, and that was very helpful and constructive, and I think we're going to continue to have meetings. But I would like to see more of that where we can actually discuss our recommendations. And then the other way is just, and this should be no surprise since I already mentioned we're the smallest agency, is staff. My agency, it's myself, 7 attorneys, 7 other attorneys, and an office manager, and that's it. We get a FOIL request that can take us weeks of one person just working on a FOIL request instead of doing our work. We are run by commissioners who are not paid. They're not compensated. That's in the executive order, they not be compensated. So they have other jobs, and we have positions for 6 commissioners, and right now we only have 3. So having people to pick up when a commissioner is busy doing work, to pick up that slack, to have someone there that is available would be helpful.
Sure, with this panel and a lot of people tuning in, I'm quite sure you'll get a lot more calls and emails now. So some publicity for you and the work you do. Phil, the same question for you, because I know you guys, were created out of stop and frisk and so many things like that, and you've put out the reports, and definitely the NYPD has been critical at times of some of the reports you have put out.
Yeah, in terms of going forward and reforms that the city may want to consider in other jurisdictions, I'll pick up where Jonathan left off. Getting direct access to certain NYPD materials would be key on our list, and including the body-worn camera footage, but also arrest reports and other types of reports that are routine in the work, our investigative work and our systemic work. And so formalizing those processes, making electronic access more easy, more direct, so that we don't have to go through a central coordinator in NYPD to get those materials would be effective. And I'm sure many of the other people watching this from other oversight agencies already have that type of access. So it's nothing radical or untested in other jurisdictions. The other reform, since we're talking about the future, is, there should be some consideration to creating, carving out OIG and YPD from the Department of Investigation. We're one of several IGs here in New York City, covering all of the city agencies. And DOI, Department of Investigation, is an institution in New York City. We've benefited from the support that we've received from the commissioner and the other components of DOI, but it's a law enforcement agency, and that has caused some consternation, legitimate consternation, among some of the community groups who see DOI, as being law enforcement, perhaps in a way that some people may think that our judgment is clouded. I would like to think that it's not, but I think consideration as we go into the future after this year of thinking and reimagining, should consider creating a separate oversight entity, a separate police accountability entity that's not under DOI.
All right. I mean, that's pretty interesting hearing from all of you, and we've heard this before, but when we talk about these reforms, your agencies are saying to us that, we need information from the NYPD and we get it. So that's one of the issues I was talking about in this reform. It's so important, and I don't know if Fred is still there, if he wants to chime in as well. The NYPD has been holding their own sessions, their hearing sessions across the city. Has the CCRB been involved in any of those sessions or any of the other agencies? And do you think those sessions have been appropriate at this point? Because there has been some criticism that people think the NYPD is not doing enough when it comes to meeting those obligations put forth by the governor and reforms.
Well, Dean, since you asked me, I will just make a brief comment and then I'll turn it to John. Yes, we have done 2 sessions with the NYPD where in the first session, we actually had members of the reform panel to attend. We talked about a number of issues that John can share, but clearly one of the ones was body-worn camera footage, and as he's mentioned, but there are others as well, such as concurrence rates with the commissioner and the department, adhering to the recommended disciplines that the CCRB sends over, and other matters. So that was one, and then we had a youth. We actually convened youth from around the city and had a youth panel with the department. And that was a rich discussion. It was unfettered. It was only structured in so much as to have enough order, but we gave the youth full engagement with the department around what they're experiencing as young people. So yes, we have had that engagement, and in both of these sessions, as I mentioned, members from the reform panel were in attendance. But John, I'm going to turn it to you and see if you want to add some more context to that.
So as Chair Davey mentioned, it was him along with 2 of our other board members, Erica Bond and Michael Rivadeneira, and they discussed improved concurrence with CCRB recommendations, especially around the areas of APU pleas and verdicts, accessed members of the NYPD's disciplinary history so that we can properly use the NYPD disciplinary matrix when it goes into effect. BWC issues, not just direct access, but also suggestions that we were making to improve the use of body-worn cameras, such as geotagging, body-worn camera footage. Some of the observations about issues we noted about the protest cases, concerns around how the department responds to people in emotional distress, young people, and finally, we've been hearing that people don't make complaints with our agency because there's a fear of retaliation. And we don't get a lot of complaints about that, but it's something that's been coming up more and more in our meetings with the community, and the chair pointed it out to the police commissioner as an area of concern for the agency.
I mean, and that is actually really concerning to hear that the CCRB, where we have said for years, if there's a problem, reach out to the CCRB, but now people are afraid because they think when the police find out, they may retaliate. I mean, when it comes to, once again, we want to stick to this message of oversight here. I mean, how do we make sure that that does not happen? And then maybe Marnie or Phil, you can jump in here. That does not happen. We're talking about reform, but at the end of the day, we're not talking about a small police department of 100 people. We're talking about, 34,000 police officers. Jump in. How do we change that in terms of, and I guess, Marnie, your agency is small, but you're there to combat corruption. Somebody would look at that as corruption. I don't know if people would, just pull that out of the sky, that they're afraid to come forward because there may be retribution from an officer. And is that what I heard, John, that they were afraid of retribution from police officers?
So I just want to be clear, we don't have any cases like that. This is just something we're hearing from members of the public. So it's something that's tough to quantify, but it's something that we wanted to bring to the department's awareness so they would be aware of it. Not necessarily, there's nothing concrete that we can say this is something that's going on, but it's an area that we're going to look at and that the department encouraged us to look at more closely.
Okay, well, the streets are talking, so we know it's stop and frisk. The streets were talking a long time before anybody came forward to bring any lawsuits about stop and frisk. So, I mean, that's something to keep our eye on. If you guys want to chime in, any of these issues, because I think, that's something new that I hadn't heard of before. I know people are always afraid to come forward, but maybe I'll ask the question this way. How do we get the NYPD, and Phil, then you can jump in. How do we get the NYPD to buy in to any of this stuff when they want to protect their own quite often?
Well, I think having strong anti-retaliation provisions and making sure the public knows that will help address some of these issues. When our office was created, the IG's office, there is an anti-retaliation provision in there, and under city law there are various protections that people in any city agency might have. But I understand some may view that as an abstract concept, but maybe we, OIG and YPD, need to do a better job in letting the public know that we will pursue complaints of retaliation where they exist. And in terms of your question, Dean, in terms of the effect on NYPD, I won't go into any details of any cases, but they know. I'll just say NYPD knows we have that authority, and I think that the handling of some of these cases would show to NYPD that we're serious about protecting the rights of complainants to file and pursue their allegations free of intimidation.
The follow-up question, anybody can chime in. How do we make sure that any of the reforms you guys are suggesting for the NYPD or for yourselves, that the city of New York, that they actually implement them or forward them to the governor? How do you make sure that they stick if you're coming up with maybe some great suggestions or reforms for your agencies and the NYPD? How do we make sure the NYPD does, follows those recommendations when sometimes, in some cases, they don't because they disagree with you?
So I think there's a new climate of transparency and accountability surrounding these issues. The executive order is just one of those examples of this new climate, and I think the fact that the city council is going to have to sign off on the recommendations that go to Albany as part of this executive order is an important part of that. The fact that Attorney General James is conducting her own investigation into the protests from this summer and has issued her own set of recommendations already. I just feel that the atmosphere has changed, and so that there's going to be a demand from the public that the change comes, and not necessarily And that's a good thing, because that's the one way to make sure that the change does come.
I'll add to this, and Marnie, you can jump on in there if you want. We know that the police unions are extremely powerful. How do they work into this equation? Because clearly we have seen them go against the NYPD's own recommendations or policies, or at least voice their outrage. How do they work in all of this when we've seen just this past year a lot of them endorse President Trump, where the citizens of New York overall went for Joe Biden. So that shows a clear split between the police unions and the citizens of the city. How do we get the police unions on board, or does it matter?
Well, the approach that we're going to answer, Marnie.
I'll defer to you, Sal.
We can both address this. The approach that we take at DOI and OIG and YPD is that the police unions, and there are 5 of them with respect to the New York City Police Department, they're stakeholders. There are a variety of legal and advocacy and social service groups that we consider stakeholders and have strong views on a variety of policing and police accountability issues. But the police union also is a constituency, if you will. And so when we issued one of our earlier reports looking at a pilot body-worn camera program, we got the input of the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association. I think they sent us a 12-page document regarding issues we had flagged for them and their positions on various issues, and we acknowledged that in our report. And so, and when the agency was starting up here in New York, I met with some union officials before I even began my time as Inspector General, because I wanted it made clear. I met with a variety of citizen, community, and advocacy groups as well, but I also met with members of a union and made it clear that I would hope that they would feel comfortable coming to the IG's office if there were policies, procedures, or operational issues that they wanted to flag for our attention. They haven't availed themselves of it so much. It's more of us reaching out to them and checking in with them on certain issues. Not every report, but I think that that dialogue with all constituencies is important if we're going to have the credibility of an office that makes findings and recommendations on police practices.
But when we talk about, and I don't want to spend too much time on the unions, but anybody that covers this or follows it knows that they, as you mentioned, they are stakeholders. So when you talk about reforming of the NYPD and reforming of the oversight agencies, how can we reform the PBA? I mean, I don't know if that's something you guys can talk about, not just the PBA, but all of the unions, because some people think that maybe they have too much power.
I think that we have to remember that there are more to the unions than just the union presidents, who are some of them are very loud and outspoken and don't have filters. I think we've seen in recent months editorials by union members saying they don't subscribe to their union president's views. And, there are thousands of members of these unions. They're not a monolith. I think if you wanted to get, the union per se on board, if we focused on body-worn cameras, if we focused on not only showing body-worn cameras, portraying them as demonstrating misconduct, but also publicized when they actually clear an officer of misconduct, that might lead unions to think that they're being treated fairly. And I think it's important to get buy-in of the unions to get buy-in that they think that they're being treated fairly and they're being heard.
Okay, I guess they know how to be heard. That's one thing about the unions in the city. What's and when we're talking about the reform for the oversight agencies, one of the things we've heard over the years, and I've worked with all of you pretty much, and I know the work that you do with trying to help the citizens, but some will feel you guys don't have power over the NYPD or to correct wrongs. So when you're talking about rebuilding trust, because that's a part of what the governor has spoken about, not just reform, but rebuilding trust between communities and cops, some folks feel your agencies, you don't have power, you can't change. What would be your message to those individuals as we move forward into 2021, looking to change policing as we know it now?
Well, I guess I'll jump in here. I guess it depends on what you mean when you say power or not having power. Some would say that. Go ahead, Dean.
No, just to be clear, I mean, we've heard it, and the CCRB has been around a long time, and like I said, your agency is a little newer there, Phil. But there are some folks who feel like you just said, you asked for information from the NYPD, and they may not give it to you, or they may give you the runaround, or they may tell you the same thing they tell me. Oh, it's a privacy issue. You can't get the information. So, how do you convince the public that, yes, you are a powerful agency and you can get reforms and you can get things done?
That's a collective effort. I mean, the access issue should not be an issue. I mean, if the police commissioner wants certain documents or materials from another unit of NYPD, he or she will have it produced to them by close of business. So that's a matter of will and willingness to on the access issue, at least, and making sure that city council members, the mayor, the police department are all on board about the need to provide access. On the issue, I was going to just very briefly just cite our recommendation authority, which Marnie's office also has. And some might think that is toothless. You can make these recommendations, but what power is there to see that they're implemented? And we issue an annual report every year where we track NYPD's implementation. And I would argue, many people around the country have similar procedures, that the ability to be very transparent about the police department's willingness or unwillingness to adopt recommendations puts a little pressure on them in a way that does exert power. And when all is said and done, about 72% of our recommendations have been adopted after a certain period of time, which is in the ballpark of what you can expect from an outside independent systemic review agency. So sometimes you have to look a little bit beyond what the statute says or what the understanding is of the authority, where it appears that we just make recommendations. I would argue that those recommendations in a city like New York sometimes carry some weight.
If you can chime in, I mean, because we do have people from across New York State and across the country watching, whether it's organizations like yourself or maybe just citizens. What would be your advice to the people in other cities, other municipalities about forming these agencies while trying to reform their local police departments, whether it's a police department or a sheriff's department, because people will look to your agency as a very large one?
So is it okay, Phil? So two things, and one thing, and then I would like to go back, if I could, Dean, to the teeth issue. On the issue of what I would suggest to another entity in a different part of New York State that's just starting up, I think body-worn camera footage is very key. It enables us to find out what happened, to make what we call determinations on the merits far more often when we have body-worn camera footage than we do with either just regular video or no video at all. And then on the issue of teeth, I think concurrence is extremely important. And I think sometimes when the CCRB has achieved a guilty verdict in the NYPD court, in the trial room, and we get a guilty verdict and it's overturned by the police commissioner, it is harmful to the perception of the agency's authority. And when there are guilty pleas where an officer admits misconduct, and then the police commissioner modifies those pleas, it is in the commissioner's power. He is the final arbiter of police discipline, but it is harmful to the perception of the CCRB's power. And I'm hopeful that the disciplinary matrix that's going to come out early next year will help eliminate some of those problems. But in the end, it's a real problem. One of the changes that happened this past summer was the repeal of 50A. And so in the past, a lot of the police disciplinary matters wouldn't be noticed by the public because they were secret. And now that that secrecy isn't going to be there, I think it'll be tougher for the department not to take CCRB recommendations with the weight they deserve.
With the toothless thing, I didn't want to say the toothless tiger, but go ahead.
Can I just add to the toothless? I think one of the most effective things that we have, because we also make recommendations, and as I stated earlier, we don't get feedback a lot of the times on those recommendations. But I think one of our biggest strengths is that the press gets involved. The press can pick up the recommendations, and then that can build public will to implement those recommendations. And so there are times where even I will just be talking about doing a project, or in the past, and the department will come down with an operation order addressing that topic. But it all depends on what the press picks up on. If the press picks up on an individual case example, that's not really what we're trying to make an issue of. We're trying to make an issue of the systemic issues. And we need the press to look at the forest more than the trees.
If I can be so bold, Marty, you don't have to agree or disagree, but I think that the NYPD should be required to respond to your recommendations, that they are required under Local Law 70 to respond to ours. I don't see why it'd be any different for your agency, and that's an easy fix going forward.
Yes, I agree. That would be very helpful to us.
You're the Inspector General, Phil, so get it done.
Go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to quickly touch on the other part of Dean's question about what advice to give to some of the other agencies around the state of New York and other places that might be seeking information. There's a wealth of information on this panel, but we don't know it all. We haven't figured it out at all. And I've been in oversight for many years. I was running the Office of Police Complaints in Washington, D.C. for many years, and been affiliated with NACOL. NACOL, I know there are people on this call who've been to NACOL conferences. We obviously weren't able to meet in Tucson in September, but that was really sort of my connection, my salvation, if you will, my group therapy each year, getting together with people from around the country to discuss police oversight issues, how we could do things better. And I would just encourage, assuming there will be, live in-person conferences at some point towards the end of next year, perhaps there will be the NACOL conference in Tucson. I would encourage people new to oversight, since there are a lot of people new to oversight after the events of this year. I would encourage people to get in contact with NACOL, National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement.
And Dean, I'd just like to point out two other areas where to just address the issue of sort of authority or teeth, as people are calling it. CCRB also has subpoena power, and I think police oversight entities around the country could think about subpoena power for their own agencies. We can both compel people to appear and gather evidence on the basis of having that subpoena power. I would say the other thing, too, is that police officers, once the agency gives notice that an officer has a complaint lodged against them they are required to come and testify. So there is considerable authority there, and then the department, reports to a public official, and everyone can hold that public official accountable. So both in terms of what are models for the rest of the nation, clearly subpoena power, and the officers being compelled to appear before the CCRB for a hearing when a complaint has been lodged and an investigation has been initiated. But also, thank God we live in a democracy, and agencies are held accountable by the people, by the elected officials who oversee them.
As we have this conversation, when we talk about reforming the police department, often we are talking about the bad apples, and some will argue it's not just a few when it comes to the NYPD, that's why we need to reform in many agencies as well. But it's important to point out that a lot of great work comes from the people that work with all of you on the panel. And the issue when you have some officers with bad training or not following training or just being egregious, that is the problem. And has the NYPD, in your opinion, with speaking to folks about reform, are they speaking to all of the individuals that they should? Are there, you mentioned at the beginning, Fred and John, that they had met with teenagers, which is so important, but are there other agencies out there? Because the NYPD has been criticized for meeting with, the powerful and not necessarily the people behind the scenes all the time. And there are a bunch of agencies in New York City. Are they meeting with everyone that they should?
So I've heard that they are meeting with a variety of groups, and I don't know that they haven't met with this group, but my suggestion would be to meet with the victims and families of victims of police misconduct, because I think that that would give them an important perspective to hear on the reform process, and put a human face to why this is important to have go on.
That depends on the administration that's in office at that time and who the police commissioner is, right, as to who they will meet with. And I guess under this administration and the leaders now in the police department, they have been somewhat open in meeting with those individuals. One of the things I often say when I'm on panels like this is that in too many neighborhoods in New York City, people are afraid of the criminals and afraid of the cops. And that is a heck of a way to have to live. So when we talk about reforming the police department, that's one of the big issues we have to look at, is that people are not afraid, who have been historically afraid. I mean, and how do we change that, especially in Black and Hispanic and brown communities, when there is a history of tension between the police and the communities that they protect and supposed to serve? And we know there are a lot of people of color on the NYPD, but that issue is still there.
Well, one of the things that we hear, Dean, when CCRB board hears when we do community meetings, is that the neighborhood coordinating officers generally come in for high marks, while some of the other officers in a particular precinct may less so. And so it seems that there needs to be more concentration on what is working to make the relationship between the neighborhood coordinating officers, I think that's what we still call them, and the communities better, and then see if some of that can't be applied also to just ongoing policing in those communities. I also think, continued work on issues of implicit bias. It seems to be a little more of a one-shot deal in the department. I think it should be more systematic and more ongoing, because implicit bias isn't rooted out, in a 1 hour or 2 hour or even an all-day training session. Those conversations, engagement around things like that need to be ongoing. I know the department is becoming more and more people of color, but the more people we can have from neighborhoods where officers police are actually on the force, I think the better. There's a clear deficit of black men by the department's own admission. Chief Madry of Community Affairs points it out almost every time he's in a public session, and I appreciate him doing that. So there are some things that can clearly be done, understanding better what's going on with NCOs, the recruitment of officers who, more officers who come from the community, and then with a particular focus on trying to understand better why African-American males are not represented as they could be and perhaps should be in the department.
Points. That's an issue I've covered a lot. I mean, they've been struggling for years with trying to get more African-American men on the force. There are a number of issues externally and internally, some people will tell you, and the issues we face just this year has made it very difficult for some men of color to say they want to join police departments. But I think they're trying to, from the stories I've done, they're trying to revamp things in the inside so you don't have that implicit bias when a person of color, a male, comes in to apply for the NYPD. And I know in a little bit, probably at least by maybe 6:30, we're going to have the public and members of the media and press chime in, and perhaps they will have some really tough questions for you. We're having a discussion now about some important issues, but I know when they chime in, they will have some tough questions. Hey, John, when we talk about this issue, yeah, sometimes it seems like we're going in circles. We talk about the same thing year after year, you know, the same issue that perhaps sometimes went on in 1970, went on in 2000, and now is going on in 2020. You mentioned body cameras. That was a game changer a few years ago. What is there one big issue, or, and this maybe all of you very quickly if you can answer it, one big issue or two that could change the NYPD to make it better than what it is if they made this particular change or this particular reform, if you have one?
So I'll go where angels dare not tread, and hope I still have my position tomorrow morning. I would say we really need to look at final disciplinary authority for disciplinary recommendations coming from the CCRB.
That we're clear and we all understand what you're saying is that who has the final say? Because no matter what you say, the police commissioner has the final say. If you say, you know, suspend somebody for 6 months, the police commissioner, no matter who it is, could say, no, we'll give them 6 days of training.
Correct. I think we need to, yes, we need to look closely at that issue and see if there are some things that we can do to bring closer alignment between the CCRB's recommendation and what the department actually does.
Well, yourself, is there one thing? I mean, you came in, and if I'm correct, you know, it was all around the stop and frisk at the time, and the trial was going on, and the city council was pushing heavy on, you know, changing the police department when it came to stop and frisk. The police department says those numbers are way down. It needs to be done, but they're doing it correctly. Some will say no, they're not. But is there another issue that you think could really make the department better and therefore New York City better?
If I could just quickly follow up on Fred's point, the binding authority issue. There are different ways to get there, and people will have discussion in the police oversight world and the community about how to bring that about where it's desirable. But it does exist in some places. My old agency in Washington, D.C., the Office of Police Complaints, would make discipline, CCRB type agency makes issues decisions by hearing officers, essentially saying whether or not the officer was guilty or not of misconduct, and then That decision, if the police department objects to it, goes up to an appeals panel of hearing officers if you want. The appeals panel holds up the original hearing officer. That must be implemented. And so I just point that out to everyone, not just on this panel, because panelists were probably familiar with that there are ways to get to that in ways that protect various parties' interest. In terms of the one magic solution question, NYPD is a sprawling enterprise. We've worked on, I've written and issued reports on many of the core topics. And I would define some of the core issues that an oversight agency such as ours deals with would be use of force, issues related to race, and discipline. So, rather than point to a specific policy that I think needs to be changed, I would say that oversight agencies in the city, that reforms are being thought about for NYPD or oversight systems, I would encourage people to focus on some of these core issues, which, they came up in the protests around the country. It's not just a New York City issue. We've weighed in on these issues before this year. And so there's any number of micro issues that arise, with respect to those topics. It's really jurisdiction specific in some cases, and I won't go through all that right now unless prompted by other questions. But I think attention on some of those core issues and policies and procedures. And again, I'm looking at it from the point of view of a systemic agency, but I guess there would be lessons here for those investigating police misconduct, like CCRB or the CCPC as well. Those issues up to greater or lesser degrees, but I would try to have an understanding of what are the core issues. And I know CCRB does statistical analysis, and they recognize core issues from their perspective, but there are recurring patterns, obviously. We just need to be, we all in my office just need to be continually and even more sensitive to those patterns.
When we talk about oversight, I know your agency has worked hard over the years to make sure that people can report misconduct or abuse or whatever it is they want to complain about, right? Is there something else as we look to reform the oversight agencies? Is there something else that can be done to make it even easier for someone to report a police officer that they think is acting inappropriately?
So this year, the agency resumed taking complaints from people who were not direct eyewitnesses to misconduct. And so if you look at the protests this summer, we got hundreds and hundreds of complaints, many of them from people who were not there but saw either coverage by reporters such as yourself, Dean, or on social media. They saw videos and or heard about incidents and were then prompted to file complaints. And so we've been investigating those. So that's, I feel like the barrier to people filing complaints has been really taken away. I think the problem is that people don't know about us. And we've been around for 26 years. And this is the first year that we're going to have paid advertising thanks to the Young Men's Initiative, which is out of City Hall. It's a program that is going to be spending money, I think almost $75,000 on ads about the CCRB so that people know that we're here to take their complaints. Dean, you're muted.
I keep hitting the wrong button.
I'm muted. Okay, go ahead, Marnie. Go ahead.
As far as making it easier to complaints, I think maybe if there was more outreach to public defenders and judges so that they could make complaints on behalf of their clients or talk to their clients about making complaints, or even lawyers in civil lawsuits. Often they don't want, from what I see, they don't want their clients to speak to internal affairs because they don't want to mess up the civil lawsuit, but that shouldn't be the primary concern. The primary concern should be getting a bad officer out of the department. One of the other things that I think is that I've lost my train of thought. I'll come back to you. Sorry.
And if you have it, John, I mean, I don't know where you plan to advertise it. Is that something that's on social media, or you're in the places where young people would be listening, to it, not necessarily, where maybe a 50 or 60-year-old will be tuning in, but, young people who do have these complaints, perhaps?
So I think it's going to be on radio and social media, but I hesitate to put the station. I'm pretty sure I know the station, but I don't want to get it wrong. So
okay,
I'm going to pass on that.
Could be,
but it is one that young people listen to.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Phil.
If I could just flag a related issue, I think these are all great ideas. What CCRB is doing, what Marnie's agency, her ideas. But another piece of the puzzle really is putting in incentives for police officers to report misconduct. Whether we're talking about biased conduct or excessive force, there are mechanisms that oversight agencies can encourage police departments to adopt to hold police officers more accountable. And perhaps, in some of these early intervention systems as well, there can be incentives built in to train the light on increasing officer integrity. So I think that it's certainly worthy. We should always be interested in exploring ways to get more complainants to step forward and not be intimidated about doing that. But we need to do what we can to help build a culture within the police departments to have officers intervene when there's bad conduct by their peers and to report misconduct.
That's interesting, and I think some police officers, that we've seen recently have come forward, whether it's publicly or, maybe the IAB reporting very, egregious stuff that I think should be reported. Do we find, and I know in just a short bit, what do we have? Almost 6:30, so in the next 10 minutes, we'll probably go to the public and the media. Is there anything, anyone on the panel that we didn't discuss that you think it's important to get out there before we bring other people into the conversation, something that we're missing, or you want to, get off your chest as we move forward about your agency and oversight and reform?
I would just say that I think the department could do itself a world of good by being more transparent. And whether that's, I know they talked about publishing the disciplinary outcomes on their website, and that stopped because of the union's lawsuit, or even with the trial calendar, they only publish the officer's name and not what the officer is charged with, or making the trial rooms are open to the public, but a lot of it happened during the day. The public works. If they live stream the trials so people could see what was going on, I think it would be very helpful and only benefit the NYPD in most cases.
I'll leave that to Jonathan and Fred, something to get that courtroom there and police headquarters open to the public and to news cameras, because that is something maybe people don't understand, that, in a court case, we're able to take our news cameras in, state Supreme Court, but when there is an internal trial for the police department, the media, we're not able to take in cameras or, record audio or anything. It's only pen and paper. So maybe that is one of the major reforms, to really find out what's going on in those trial rooms. All right. Anything else? If not, I think we can almost gear up to take in some members of the media, the press, and the public. Go ahead, John. I see you have your mic open there.
All right. I should. Apologies.
All right. So if we want to bring in other people now, hopefully we have people lined up, but please feel free to chime in with your questions about oversight when it comes to the governor asking police departments across the state, not only the NYPD, but across the state, to come up with some reforms for their agencies, and also how these oversight agencies should be reforming themselves.
All right, thank you so much, Dean. So we'll be hearing first from Nick Smith, and while we get him on, I just want to acknowledge some folks in the room: the Seattle Office of the Inspector General, Baltimore City Office of Equity and Civil Rights, Peekskill Task Force, Local New York, the NYPD, the City of Fort Worth Office of Police Oversight, Denver Citizens Oversight, the Atlanta Citizens Review, the National Urban League, the Legal Aid Society, the City of Fresno, their Office of Independent Review, New York University, the Independent Commission of Investigations in Jamaica, the Detroit Board of Police Commissioners, BRAG, the Bronx Rises Against Gun Violence, and also the Legal Aid Society of Westchester, Brooklyn Defender Services, and University of Pennsylvania. And one last, the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability in Grand Rapids, Idaho. Thank you all for joining us. Nick?
Everybody, can you see and or hear me? I think I'm on. Is that right? Okay, cool. Hey, good to see you all. A bunch of friends on the panel. I'm Nick Smith, first Deputy Public Advocate. And for clarity or transparency, I worked in the administration for a couple of years as well with CCRB. So I have some actually testimony that's about a page, but I'm going to first very quickly make a couple of points that come from just the most recent conversation between John, Phil, lose my train of thought. Phil, John, basically all of you on the panel. I'm sorry about that. Let me just, yeah, that's right. Thank you. So a couple of notes in terms of core recommendations. CCRB, yes, I think that's correct. CCRB determinations need to be made permanent. The core message here is self-policing just doesn't work. And so you've got to have an entity like CCRB who does the work of going through the trials, making recommendations. Those things need to be binding. CCRB has to have increased budget and increased staff. We've been consistently pushing the administration to do so, and that's critical, including, by the way, for the outreach budget. PD needs an improved early warning system. And I know there's a current system in place, but we don't often even hear, for example, Dean on NY1 stories where officers who have X number of substantiated complaints being kicked off of the force. That's a real problem. And by not doing so in the way that it should happen, doesn't lead to the best confidence in the 8.5 million New Yorkers who the police department are charged with overseeing. Second, we need a absolutely codified and revamped use of force standard that is clear and transparent. On top of that, the patrol guide, thinking about chokeholds. We know the chokeholds were banned in the patrol guide. Let's take some of those core patrol guide insertions and codify them into law so that when someone is aggrieved and CCRB comes with, for example, a recommendation, if it goes to CCRB, there's real a statute in place that a arbitrating body like a judge can look directly to a law, not just the patrol guide. So there's a bunch more there. I know that was fast. I'm happy to share more after the session, but let me quickly just get through the written testimony so I don't get in trouble by our team, and then I will yield the time back, and I'm happy that you all invited the Public Advocate's Office to jump on. Good evening. My name is Nick Smith, First Deputy Public Advocate. The Public Advocate has long supported stronger oversight of the department. The Public Advocate, as you all know, was the prime sponsor of the Community Safety Act, which led to the creation of the Inspector General for the Police Department and made it easier for those alleging abuse based on protected categories and classes, including people of color and members of the LGBT community, to have their claims considered in state court. We know more must be done, and we have several recommendations. First, all unredacted body camera footage must be released to the public within 5 days of recording. This video footage must be immediately sent to CCRB the Office of Inspector General for the Police Department and the Department of Records. Since the PD can be unresponsive with FOIA requests for footage, the latter option makes it a bit easier for folks who want to see unredacted footage to get that footage. And we know there's been cases, for example, the family of Kowalski Trawick, who suffered from a mental health crisis and was killed by the police department. Their family to this day, and it's been about, I think, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, has not seen the unredacted footage. That is a huge problem, and again, doesn't build trust in the department. PD must also, we also must have oversight over PD's use of technology. Deployment of technology draws legitimate concerns on how unregulated mass surveillance can negatively impact New Yorkers. A community-regulated process works best to ensure privacy rights, to prevent discrimination, and to limit to necessary use only. Accountability and transparency are vital in cases of police misconduct. Providing access to the public is not only for public viewership, but also ensures that families of victims of police violence and brutality have access to footage. With all of that, I know that was quick. I want other members of the public to jump in. But those are some core recommendations that we have. And to Dean and all the panel, we do look forward to working with you on a continued basis to ensure we strengthen all of your entities and ensure that there's greater confidence in the police department as they are charged with protecting and serving. So Dean and the panel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Next, we'll be hearing from Eric Omanaski. And while we get him on, just also want to acknowledge that Jennifer Jones-Austin is one of the facilitators for the New York Police Department's listening tours is on the line as well. Eric?
Hi, it's Eric Umansky from ProPublica. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to ask a question. So I have what are really two questions, which is one, I just want to make sure I'm clearly understanding each of your viewpoints on this question that was briefly discussed earlier about the police commissioner's total authority over discipline. It sounds like, Fred, that you think that that should be changed. I just would like to understand as clearly as possible what each of your positions is on that. And secondly, it's really just a sort of the other part of it is the question of authority or some say involving not just individual cases, but policy. I know that's something, you guys were discussing, that it's not simply a question often of, individual incidents, that they're systemic issues. And one thing that I've heard, it's some other civilian oversight bodies, including in, for example, Denver, is that they have been allowed to have some authority, some say involving policy. So, the question is, one, should there be some say? What is the position in terms of the police commissioner's authority over discipline, and what should ultimately the CCRB or other agencies have, oversight agencies have, in terms of policy? Thank you.
So since you asked and raised my name, I'll respond, and then let's see if John has more to add. So let me speak first personally, and just based on my experience with the CCRB, not representing the views of my colleagues on the board necessarily, I do believe that we need to have a serious look at the question of final authority when it comes to CCRB cases before the department. At a minimum, when there is a negotiated plea and penalty, unless there's some serious misinterpretation of law or new facts, those pleas should stand. and the penalties associated with them that the officer with an attorney has agreed to should stand. I think at a departmental trial, when there is a guilty verdict, that guilty verdict should stand, and that the CCRB's recommended discipline on the other side of that guilty verdict should stand as well. So at a minimum, those two things. Now, perhaps when we get the matrix and we can align the penalties with that matrix, there'll be even less of a reason for, at least stated reason or purported reason, for there being a deviation by the department from CCRB's either negotiated pleas and penalty or a guilty verdict and penalty. So, but yeah, at a minimum, that should change. Ideally, when the CCRB makes a recommendation makes a recommendation in substantiated cases with a penalty, the department would be required to adhere to those as well. So that would be my position on disciplinary authority.
I guess Phil and Marnie, if you guys wanted to chime in quickly about, is that your viewpoint as well, that Eric is asking, should the police commissioner have final say on discipline, especially, when the CCRB is prosecuting a case?
Well, Eric, I'm gonna sort of hedge on your question. I don't want to. It's not something that I've discussed with my commissioners, so I don't want my personal views to be attributed to my commission. I will say that the disciplinary matrix, as it stands now, has a requirement that the police commissioner put in a memo his reasons when he departs from a recommended penalty. And I think if there are standards in place on what the penalty should be, it might not be as much of an issue. But again, it goes back to transparency. And so if we know that cops are being disciplined similarly for similar misconduct, and if there's a deviation, what the reasons are for those deviations, I think that's what we're in agreement with. I don't want to opine on whether the police commissioner should be the final arbiter, though.
Thing, Phil, and then also just to be clear, because we have so many people from around the country chiming in, and someone can clarify this in 20 seconds, when discipline is handed down to an officer, it's actually from an NYPD judge. Am I correct? It's not like the CCRB it's giving the actual punishment. Maybe you're making a recommendation, but there's the judge who gives the final recommendation that goes up to the higher ups in the NYPD. Is that correct?
Some of the most serious forms of discipline that the CCRB handles, the Administrative Prosecution Unit brings disciplinary cases in the NYPD's trial room. And then those cases are presided over by either a Deputy Commissioner of Trials or an Assistant Deputy Commissioner of Trials, who is an administrative law judge or hearing officer, and they then make recommendations to the police commissioner, and the police commissioner is the final arbiter of discipline for members of the NYPD. I think I did that in 20 seconds.
Great, thank you. Next we'll be hearing from Daryl Brown. And while we're bringing him up, I want to also acknowledge that we have the Sonoma County Independent Office of Law Enforcement, as well as Ann Arbor's Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. Daryl?
All right, am I there?
Yes, sir.
How's everyone doing this evening? To your question, I think it was Marnie, we were talking about the video cameras and the footage and everything. we're kind of going through some of the stuff with that now, and one of the things I would caution you to make sure that you try to avoid is having a limit, because our cameras are stored, the video footage is stored for 90 days. And after 90 days, if a person doesn't come back with a complaint or anything like that, that video is destroyed and it's erased. So I would say that that would be something that you might want to look into and get in the timeline that we're working at, is trying to get that extended to a longer period of time. And also, I think it's very, it's untenable for us to think to have videos held onto and released when there's events for longer than 5 days, because we just experienced a situation here in Detroit with a shooting, and we had to press, and with the cooperation of the chief, to release that video within an hour to show the public that the officers were not at fault and were not in wrong, and it was a justifiable shooting. But the biggest point and problem with it, to me, with all of the video stuff, is that I believe that there should be an outside entity controlling the video storage and how it's captured and when it should be released, and it shouldn't be the departments or the commissions, because I just think that we, with an outside entity controlling it, we can control when it's going to be released. And I know it comes into play with different CGIS problems and information that's out there to the public, but that's what I really want to get across to you, is the video thing, and the body-worn cameras here are working very well.
All right, Daryl, thank you.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Next, we'll be hearing from Jose Pagerly, and just a reminder for everyone to keep comments to about a minute.
How's that?
Hi there. Can everyone hear me and see me okay? Hey there. Can everyone hear me and see me all right?
We got you,
Yes.
Jose.
Okay, fantastic. So I've got a question about the FOIL process. So Ms. Flitt asked about transparency. And one thing that's unclear to me as a reporter is, oftentimes in my investigations, I'll file a public records request, I'll file FOIL, and they'll go unanswered, right? So even the most basic questions that the DCPI should be answering, they'll say, well, go file a public records request. And I'll tell you from experience, it's a black hole. I mean, I've been filing them for half a decade now, and I never hear back. So does that fall, is it anyone's responsibility here to follow up on the transparency aspect of NYPD, or is that outside the bound? So that's my question. Thank you.
I'll jump in. It's potentially within the jurisdiction of OIG and NYPD. I mean, that's a policy practice of NYPD, and we've heard some of these concerns about FOIL practices from different groups in connection with very, very specific issues. So it's something we're always alert to. We haven't issued any reports with respect to FOIL practices, but it is something potentially within the jurisdiction of OIG and NYPD. Absolutely. We're not in the business of resolving individual FOIL concerns that a member of the press or a member of the public might have, but to the extent there are systemic issues impacting police-community relations or having other detrimental effects, that would be something that we could look into.
Something, John, where have I heard that your agency, sometimes you have to FOIL for information as well as the CCRB, or am I incorrect about that?
That's not correct, Dean. We, under the charter, the department is obligated to cooperate with our requests for information. So we don't file FOIL requests with them. We just send them requests electronically through IAB or the Department Advocate's office, and then they comply with those requests.
Oh, they comply all the time?
They do a pretty good job. The question is the timeliness, and then there are issues where they disagree with us about whether or not the information we're requesting is within the scope of our jurisdiction.
Okay, yeah, that's something, because Jose is bringing that up about the foil and it disappears, or you end up as a reporter or a news agency having to take them to court, which, you know, may not be possible depending on your news agency. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Damon Lawrence.
Hello? Hello? Oh my gosh, this is happening right now. Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Oh my gosh, I don't. Sorry about that. That's embarrassing. Hello guys. So my name is Damon. I'm from the Lawrence family. I live in Bushwick Projects. I just want to make it clear I'm an American Indian, not to be confused with Black or African American or Latino or any other title. I just want to get that out there. So this is specifically for Phil. So I'm trying to be a youth activist within my community. I live in Bushwick Projects once again. And this past year, PSA 3 and 90th Precinct have been conducting themselves as a foreign occupying force. My question to you is, as I get my community together to conduct themselves, you know, because there have been things going on in our community, in the surrounding community, as we come together for this summer and things of that nature, would it be an issue, and this is Phil, would it be an issue for the community to have their own security team as far as dealing with things that are not crimes?
Hi, Damon. What do you mean by would it be possible for that?
Okay, so
security.
Do you know how the Jewish community have their own security teams in their neighborhoods and how they conduct themselves just in case, you know, anything happens within their community? Would it be an issue for, like, say for instance, Bushwick, Marcy, Borinquen, Tompkins, if they did their own process in screening the residents for positions such as, but not limited to, making sure that the grounds are safe, making sure that, let's say, for instance, tourists who quite often come in our area because we're next to the gentrified area, comes into our community, let them know, like, hey, you know, the ins and outs of where they can go. It's basically like a help service and to intervene in just in case situations where they might see a potential for incident to happen.
Well, I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious from my perspective, but within the bounds of the law, I mean, it depends on what this group would be securing the housing facility with. And you sort of indicated your concerns about NYPD being occupying force.
They're excessive.
Because you're aware that there are groups within various housing facilities that have partnered with NYPD to build it, but it doesn't sound like you're interested in.
Hold on, wait. I'm sorry, Phil. Sorry to interrupt you. I know exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about the Wicks Against Violence. You're talking about the Mayor's Action Plan. And currently, I was part of that. I was the one who started the free 30-hour OSHA for my community, specifically with Juan Ramos. However, Juan hasn't been conducting himself in a professional manner as of late. And he's been letting people go who are been passionate about our community. So I know that there's things set up for us and how we can communicate and things of that nature, but there's people from these 501c3s who say they want to do these things for us, but the way they are moving, it's not articulating the same thing. And this is more so on the side of him working with his team and not directly with the community. So the community may see one thing, but his team sees another. And that would be my only issues with working coincide with the Mayor's Action Plan, the Wick Against Violence, and all the other programs that are associated with that goal and objective for these at-risk communities.
So it sounds like you have several concerns, and Have you followed up with the mayor's office with respect to in any of these programs that you've seen problems with?
Every time I try to follow up with anything, I always, because of my passion, because of the way I look, I always seem like the aggressive person. But there's some things that I can't do. I can't do. There's nothing I can do about it. So I have to. I'm trying to find ways to go about things because I'm a very big guy and very assertive. I have to go around and find ways to get into or solving problems for our community because people tend to get intimidated by the way I address things. So the way I was going to do it, and unfortunately, I feel like this is the only way I can do it, is without causing too much drama, because at the end of the day, I want to work in conjunction with everybody so that the summer is better than the last. And because we've had so many negative things happen in our community, but NYPD has been acting ridiculous. So I have a page on Facebook called Projects Just Us, where I will be posting every video that has happened or NYPD encounter that has happened with Bushwick, and so that you guys understand that I want to work with the youth. I don't care
Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence,
okay.
I'm gonna have Jahai from our office reach out to you and get your contact information, and we'll connect you with someone who can help you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I was going to propose the same thing to the extent that there are issues that we should be aware of in my office. So we will also follow up with you, Damon.
All right. Well, I just wanted to point quick before I go. It's projects with an S, Just Us, Police Encounters, or NY Encounters. Because if you just type in Projects Just Us, it's going to go to the page I've been working on for resources since COVID started. So if you go to Police Encounter or NYPD Encounters, that's what you'll get, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damon. We'll have Jahai reach out. Next, we'll be hearing from Nicole Khan.
Well, I don't know if you can hear me, but I have limited use of my voice.
We can hear you, Ms. Khan.
Okay, so I have a long stretching problem with the NYPD, and this is when every time I go to file a police report, I'm giving a hard time and I'm giving a runaround, and I never get my reports filed. I filed numerous AIB complaints, CCRB, nothing ever happens. I just get a supervisor who tells me, oh, we didn't find any evidence. Anyway, I decided to take matters into my own hands, and I record every encounter that I have with the NYPD. I have hours of footage of misconduct you can review when you like. The last time I had an encounter with the NYPD, I was assaulted on a bus because I had a service animal and the bus driver wouldn't drive the bus, causing a passenger to assault me on the bus. I called 911. A police report was taken, and the whole part of me being assaulted was mysteriously out of the police report. Okay, I called the hate crimes unit. They advised me to go and file another report with my local police station. And again, that part is out of the police report. So just like how you have a citizen's ability to write their own statement for domestic violence report, we need this also for police reports, because I'm sick and tired of dealing with NYPD and their arrogant attitudes and their authoritarian way of speaking to me, because I'm 40 years old, but I look like I'm in my 20s and I get treated like a child when I go there or interact with these police officers. So right now, instead of wasting taxpayer dollars with dealing with babysitting the NYPD, would you guys mind handling this? I also have a complaint that I was sent to the Inspector General's office. I had someone call me from a private number. I don't even know how to get back to this person. I never heard back of anything from this. Well, long story short, it seems like the only way to deal with these NYPD issues and this government, because I also testified at a city council meeting, I can't get back in touch with any of them. They won't return my calls or my emails. But I filed a claim with the city for $1 billion. So maybe that will open your eyes now to handle this. Because you know what? Now you have an attorney who's willing to review my hours of video footage. But this is what it takes. Wasting of taxpayer dollars to dealing with juvenile behavior of publicly funded thugs, because that's what you're hiring, publicly funded thugs. Okay, and this needs to stop.
Nicole,
I
let's
will
see
bankrupt the city to deal with it if you need to.
Nicole, let's see if they can answer any of these questions or give you any advice for a person who has been trying time and time again to report some of these issues. Nicole, thanks a lot. If anybody wants to chime in on that.
Thank you for your comments, Nicole. You said you filed a complaint with my office. I'm not personally aware of that complaint, but I will make it a point of looking for it and following up with you as is necessary from my office.
And Nicole, what I'm going to ask is once when Jahai gets done with prior gentleman, he'll take your information for both me and Phil, and I'll make sure that Phil gets it, and we'll both look into it on each on our own end and see what happened to your case and get back to you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Next, we'll be hearing from Josh Kaplan and then Luca Powell. Just want to remind the audience to limit their questions to 1 minute and to keep the content specific to the discussion of oversight, and please refrain from describing specific incidents or complaints. Josh?
Thank you. This is Josh Kaplan. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. And, thank you all for taking the time and for giving me a chance to ask a question. I have a question for Phil. As you probably know, we've been reporting for a while on the NYPD Vice, and I know that the DOI and Inspector General received a call for an investigation almost 3 years ago into some specific undercover officers within Vice, and that investigation's ongoing, and that about 2 years ago, Senators Dan Court and Jessica Ramos requested an investigation into Vice unit at large, and there have been a couple more calls for requests for investigations this week from lawmakers. And I'm just trying to, I was hoping you could speak to kind of the big picture of how the public should understand that sort of delay in investigation moving forward, and also if the department's been doing anything that has made it more difficult to expeditiously look into the conduct of that sizable unit.
Hi, Josh. I'm the fact that I can't talk about any investigation that might possibly be underway, but in your reporting, you certainly have talked to people, it sounds like, who have been in touch with us, and I want to assure the public that we take these complaints very seriously. ProPublica published another story, I think, that was published today, and a couple of weeks ago, which shed some new light on some of these issues. And we get evidence that in the course of our reviews and investigations that sometimes leads to other evidence or leads down to brick walls in other instances. And sometimes when you're trying to decide whether or not there's a systemic problem, those sorts of reviews or investigations can be prolonged for any number of reasons. That said, we certainly have been in touch with people who have filed complaints in this area, and based on your reporting, other concerns brought to our attention recently, we're taking I'm not, going to evaluate that information in a fair manner, and when there's the opportunity for us to comment more publicly on the nature of some of these allegations or findings, we will do that. And sometimes these investigations take longer than anyone would hope, but I want to assure the public we take those concerns very, very seriously, and we'll be communicating with those individuals or lawmakers that have filed complaints with us, and we usually do a pretty good job acknowledging that. It's possible that something may have slipped under the cracks in not acknowledging a complaint, but we've gotten a number of complaints in this area, and they picked up in intensity recently, and in part probably because of your strong reporting. But we are an agency, determined to find the facts, and we'll proceed, based on our understanding of the facts, whether to open or expand an investigation. But this is a very serious matter with respect to the powers and the authority of the vice unit. And I just want to make sure the public understands we understand, hear loud and clear some of the concerns that have been registered.
Great, thank you for that. Next, we'll be hearing from Luca Powell. I want to acknowledge the Interfaith Center as well as the San Diego oversight body is also in attendance. Luca?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time tonight. I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit to the subject of lawsuits, which obviously we all see the same news story every year, indicating how many millions the city has paid in lawsuits this year for several civil lawsuits against the NYPD. But I think more importantly is the fact that all of these lawsuits seem to have the same clause absolving the officer or non-admissions of guilt. So my question is really to get a sense from both of you of how that clause, which is in almost every single lawsuit settlement, how does that affect the projects of oversight that you both have? For CCRB complaints, you can see sometimes that a complaint will be closed pending litigation, for example, in the NYCLU database that's online now. You can find that. And Mr. Ure, also you recommended in 2015 that data from lawsuits be more integrated into the NYPD's improvement of their policing in one of your reports. So the question, I'm sure, is a different answer from both of you because it's a different mechanism, but I'd really love to know how these settlements are affecting the oversight projects for both of you.
Phil, do you want to go first?
If I could just ask Luca, do you have it in front of you, the provision that you're citing in some of these settlement agreements that's at issue? Are you still on the call, Luca?
I can, off the top of my head, say it says the settlement was closed without admission in sum or substance of fault on the part of the defendant. It's basically how it goes in all the lawsuits. Or do you mean something else from your report?
No, I just want to make sure that I have the proper context.
Yeah, that's the line. That's the line.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm probably lacking some context, and we've written several lit data reports, but it seems like you're expressing a concern about the challenges that an oversight agency might have in getting some of this data, litigation data. Is that correct?
Sure. I mean, how do you proceed with oversight when legally there's an absolution that occurs? Is my question.
Data,
obviously. Yeah. Go ahead.
No. I'm sorry for interrupting.
So I don't think it's an absolution.
Yeah,
I think there are in most cases, the purpose of a civil lawsuit
and I'm already hearing the plaintiff's attorneys who I'm friends with disagreeing with me strenuously, but it is to get compensation for the victim of misconduct. And it is not truly concerned with who is the most responsible as it is who is the deepest. And so when we are doing oversight work, we are trying to figure out where the responsibility for the misconduct lies, and giving discipline to the member of service who is responsible for the misconduct. And I actually read something online today by Professor Andrea Ritchie, where she was criticizing the focus on civil lawsuits as a solution to police misconduct, because then the impetus is to lower recoveries for victims rather than reduce police misconduct. And so I think when people are victims of misconduct, if they have suffered losses, they should be compensated. And the appropriate way for that to happen in our system is through civil litigation. But there also needs to be an oversight function. And at the CCRB, we've worked out something where we can continue to conduct our oversight while civil litigation is ongoing. And we are working to explain how the agency works to civil attorneys all the time so that they understand and feel comfortable with allowing their clients to bring a complaint to the CCRB while their litigation is pending. And it is a struggle to do outreach and public education to those communities, which are very important, because many times people are more concerned with their compensation than they are with getting, and as well they should be. They suffered a loss. They should get compensated. But those two goals are, while they are done by different parts of different systems, they are not necessarily opposed to one another.
Thank you for that, Luca. Next, we'll be hearing from Alexander Davidoff.
Yes, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm a student, so my question might seem silly. I see that we have like 30,000 police officers in the NYPD, and we had a few phases of the body cams. I believe phase 1 happened in April 2017, December 2017, phase 2, and phase 3 began in March 2019 with 4,000 body-worn cameras. My question to you guys would be, what is the issue with having the whole force wear the cameras? And I believe somebody else mentioned earlier that the data is only kept for 90 days. So unless a complaint is lodged, this is just dismissed. I mean, or the footage is just gone, the data is deleted. What is the problem?
Mr. Davidoff, so that is not the New York City system. In New York City, all data is kept at a minimum for a year. And then there are certain things where if there's certain kinds of complaints or criminal cases, that'll cause the case to be kept for even longer. But it is not a 90-day timeline. It is a 1-year timeline minimum. Second of all, currently the NYPD, their program, they decided to accelerate the program. And so at some point, they've decided to just equip as many officers as possible. And I'm pretty certain if they are not at the whole patrol force, they are very close to having every uniformed member of service equipped with a body-worn camera when they're on patrol.
So what would happen if a victim of one of these situations wouldn't even know that they could reach out and find this footage for over a year? Why can't this footage be stored indefinitely, especially with data being cheaper now? significantly cheaper than it was back when this program was being planned.
So I think I don't think that data is as cheap as you think it is for the amount of data that we're talking about. The body-worn cameras are very sophisticated, and they take a lot of memory with their footage. And with 30,000 police officers on patrol, there is a lot of footage to keep and sort. And while people might not know that there is footage, they do know that they were the victim of misconduct, so they should be able, if they are interested in getting that footage, an unreasonable amount of time to request it.
Marnie, I see you wanted to jump in. You've been quiet for a while. Is there something you want to say?
I was just going to repeat what Jonathan said, that I know that the NYPD, when they were rolling out the body camera program, was very concerned about the cost of storage. And then we are talking about 30,000 officers who have multiple encounters per day that they are videotaping. And it does take up a lot of storage. And they came up with this year minimum timeline, unless, as Jonathan said, there was something else going on, like a complaint was made. I think I'm not sure that they would just turn over body camera footage to a civilian requesting it anyway, but the important thing is that a civilian makes the complaint either with CCRB or with Internal Affairs or with the Inspector General or with the DA's office, so they can get access to that body camera footage.
Dean? I'm sorry, Mark.
But people can file FOIL requests with the department, and they respond to those requests for your own body-worn camera footage. If they're not, then I think Phil should look into that. Not to give you more work, Phil, but
well, we just heard the reporters say they asked for FOIL information and they don't get it.
But that is different than a civilian asking for their own body-worn camera.
Yeah, I don't know how, and maybe we can all look into that, and maybe there's some people listening now to find out if you had an interaction with a police officer, whether good or bad, or you just want to see what's on it. Can you actually take a look at it? That would be very interesting.
I'm pretty sure the Right to Know Act requires the department to turn over body-worn camera footage to the civilian who's captured on the footage.
You may be right. I'm not sure.
Dean, this is Fred, and I am going to have to sign off for a couple of more meetings before this night's over. I'm going to thank you for your willingness to host. John, Darsh, and the staff at CCRB for helping to organize this, and Phil and Marnie for being such great colleagues in government and in the civic space. So thank you all, and I will be talking to you all shortly, I hope, and then thanks to the public for coming out as well.
All right, happy holidays to you.
I'm not ending them. I'm just signing off. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, I know we're going to probably go at least another 10 minutes because we have perhaps other folks who have questions or statements to make. And just to say this so that I don't forget to mention it as we wrap up, I do understand that this meeting will be posted on the CCRB's website, and that's at nyc.gov/CCRB. And it should be up at the end of this week or next week. So if you want to watch the full conversation or have others watch it, that would be very important.
And we're going to share it with the Commission to Combat Police Corruption and NYPD OIG so that they can put it on their websites as well.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Arno. Sorry.
Hello? Yes. Hi, my name is Arno Pedram. I work with Luca Powell. We're freelance journalists.
I had a follow-up question to this question about lawsuits. I was thinking about what you were saying about how some people are filing lawsuits for compensation. I think one worry when looking at those lawsuits is that all these lawsuits end up in dismissal with prejudice and without recognizing any sort of guilt from officers. So the question is, what kind of impact those lawsuits have on officers? Like, can we think about a situation in which an officer has been sued once or multiple times, and those cases have all been settled, and they are for cases, for example, I don't know, of excessive force, false arrest. I think many reports have been done for cases around settlements around sexual assault, and how like those settlements can cause some problems because they don't recognize guilt and they protect sexual predators in many cases. So I'm wondering if like you can see a similar problem for police officers, that the city basically bails out a lot of people, a lot of police officers without recognizing guilt and without like attaching that. Like, does that not create a problem in which their careers are not affected by these settlements and these accusations? Or do you think that the settlements are a form of, like, do these settlements actually have an impact on these officers' careers?
If I may, and Jonathan, I'm sure you can chime in as well. The disciplinary system runs separate from the civil lawsuit system. And regardless of the outcome, if CCRB or Department of Investigation unit finds misconduct of an officer, they can bring charges or issue command discipline, which is less serious discipline, against the officer. What I find in reading through disciplinary cases is that a lot of times trial commissioners will find that the existence of a lawsuit against an officer when a civilian is testifying, they will use that to diminish the civilian's credibility when making credibility determinations, when it's the civilian versus the officer testifying. I don't know if you find that to be the case as well, Jonathan, but they do take it into consideration when they're judging credibility, that maybe the civilian has a motive to not be entirely truthful because they do have a compensation issue at stake.
Wow, okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that raises a bunch of other questions for me, but that's good to know. Thank you.
If I could just jump in real quickly on this question to Arno. One of the reasons we started looking at litigation data in our first such report that was issued in April of 2015, referenced by a previous audience member, is that by looking at lawsuits that have been filed, even if they've been settled or go to a verdict, if through carefully culling information, distilling information from these lawsuits, we've been trying to encourage a culture within NYPD to look for patterns and trends. And so even though there may be concerns that an individual officer was not held accountable in the way that the plaintiff wanted, there may be lessons to be learned. There's much information to mine from these lawsuits, even those that are settled. That's been a recurring theme in some of our reports. NYPD, to their credit, is doing more and more of this, but should be doing more.
Thank you. So you're saying that the information that's shared in a lawsuit before it's settled is used within the NYPD for disciplinary procedure. So there's like a relationship there, right?
Well, not the information in the lawsuit, but are you talking to me or Phil?
Sorry, I was just what Phil was saying about the NYPD.
Okay, then I'll mute myself again.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, Arno, I'm saying that it may not be used in a disciplinary proceeding. There may not be accountability of the sort that you're concerned about, individual accountability, but that's maybe one reason why the case settled. There may be, strong facts on both sides. I'm saying that sometimes you have to sort of step out of the lawsuit, get the information, from that case. Maybe it's a specific type of excessive force that was used. And if NYPD does a better job in mining and collecting information from lawsuits and look at the allegations, not saying that this one is definitely meritorious or this one is definitely not meritorious, but there would be some attempt to pull out information from lawsuits which had some credible information. Larger lessons can be learned by the department in terms of developing policy, improving supervisory practices, developing training. That's a form of accountability, systemic accountability that sometimes can happen when individual accountability doesn't occur to individual plaintiff's liking.
I see. Thank you so much.
That makes sense. Sure.
Can I?
Oh, I think you got cut because we're coming up on the 2 hours. That went by very quickly. We are going to wrap up and ask the three of you actually to have final statements of your pledge to citizens, to the people of New York City, as we move into this reform and oversight of the NYPD and reforming your own agencies. What is your pledge to citizens? Well, first I want to say, because John, you were pretty right on this. Somebody asked about getting the body camera footage that they were on, and according to the city's website, it says members of the public can request video under the Freedom of Information Law, FOIL. The NYPD will provide video in response to a FOIL request unless otherwise prohibited by law. The video may contain audio or visual redactions to protect the privacy of people captured in the videos or other protected material for that FOIL. So you can request it, and hopefully most folks are getting that. And as we wrap up, I did hear a lot of great suggestions from people, and including from you guys. So I know this will be passed on to the city council, the mayor, and on up to the governor to make the NYPD and the community work better together. I definitely heard about you guys, the CCRB, John, getting the body camera footage a lot more quickly, maybe within just a couple of days. The PC perhaps looking at that issue or changing it, the police commissioner having final say on discipline of officers. And one person mentioned, and I don't know how much in the police report, but they said they should be able to write their own police report or have a section there for them to write in it. And I'm not sure if that's there or not, but I've heard that complaint before, that people give a statement and then the police report comes back totally different than what they explained. And I heard a prominent individual tell me that once before, who was in an accident, and they were very upset with the police report. But I'm going to allow John, Phil, and Marnie to give their final statements as we wrap up.
So I just want to thank Marnie and Phil and Dean for being a part of this. I think it was extremely helpful, and I have to go put my son to bed. So as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to leave. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And my pledge to the people of the city is that the CCRB is going to continue to try and improve how we work for you, whether it is improving how we communicate with you through our disposition letters and on our website, or fighting for direct access to body-worn camera footage, increasing concurrence, making sure that people have access to the information that we have collected and we have determined is information, whether conduct is misconduct or not. We pledge to do our job for you as best as we possibly can. Thanks, everyone.